Yeah. All right. Let's go.
Hello, everybody. It's a Merry Christmas on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Joined for our Steelers Chiefs post-game show by Paul Zeise, Post-Gazette sports columnist, after an ugly loss for the Steelers. I don't think there's any other way to say it, Paul. They stunk today.
They stunk today. I think that they were badly outcoached today. I think that they were outclassed today. I think that we can probably put a fork in the idea that they have an elite defense. And I would say it's questionable if they can even beat the Bengals at this point. This to me was different than the last two games. You know, the last two games, they were a little shorthanded. Against Baltimore, they were missing, obviously, Pickens, and then they were missing some guys on their, in their secondary. Eagles just, they were playing really well. They were in a stretch, and there's an argument to be made they might be the best team. Those two games, obviously weren't ideal. But Adam, I think they felt differently than this. I mean, this felt like it's one of those things where, I don't even know how good the Steelers really are. And I'll tell you, I hate to be this guy because I do think fundamentally Mike Tomlin is a good coach. And I might even say one of the better coaches in the NFL. I do believe that. And I do believe that, he's a guy who probably gets a little too much criticism at times. But I did not feel like this looked like a very well-coached team today. It just didn't. I thought there were some things they did. How many times were they going to allow Travis Kelce to be wide open running off the line of scrimmage or down the field? How many times were they going to allow those little, sideways passes that go for 10 or 11 yards because they don't want to make an adjustment? I hated some of their play calling. I thought was terrible. I thought when they were supposed to be aggressive, they were being conservative. When they were supposed to be conservative, they were being aggressive. And then, the topper for me, game's probably over, Adam. I get it, okay? But I'm going to ask you something. Where did you go to school? Bethel Park, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay, you went to Bethel Park. So I'm going to put your Bethel Park education to the test, okay? If you're down 19 points in an NFL game, what is the only path to get to 19? There's only one path, meaning there's one path with the least amount of possessions. What's the only path you have to get to 19 points in the NFL in 3 possessions?
3 touchdowns.
8, and a field goal, right? 16.
Well, I guess that's true too, yeah.
16 and a field goal. You tie the game. So they get down there. There's 10 minutes left, which you got 3 timeouts. There's a 2-minute warning. You know what? It's possible that you can get 2 more possessions out of the game. It was 4th and 5 or 6 or whatever it was, or maybe even like 8 or whatever. You had a 54-yard field goal attempt for Chris Boswell. Instead, they're playing games and they get a procedure. 2 guys in illegal procedure, and now it's 5 yards back. I'm not saying that's the game deciding play, but that's the kind of thing that it just kind of felt all game long. They had no idea what they were doing. I don't care what anybody says. You're down 19 with 10 minutes left. Your best situation there, kick the field goal. Now you're down 18, or now you're down 16. Who knows? You get a stop and you score and you get the 2. Now you're down a touchdown. But by doing what they did, which they were trying to, it was 4th and 9, and they were trying to fool the Chiefs into jumping off sides or something, and they just didn't get it done. This felt to me different than the other 2 losses, because this felt to me like a complete and utter 100% meltdown on both sides of the ball, even on special teams to a degree, and coaching. I thought it was a bad game for the Steelers.
Yeah, it was their worst game of the season. It's one of the worst games in recent memory. And I don't even think you have, I think with the Eagles game and the Ravens game, you're able to say, well, George Pickens was hurt. You're missing this guy. You were missing so much of the secondary last week. There were some built-in excuses that you could kind of fall back on. Listen, Joey Porter Jr. wasn't in this game. I'm sure these guys are tired. I'm sure they're banged up, but so were the Chiefs. And this was an inexcusable loss. There's no other way to put it. Paul, we're going to go person by person and break this game down. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Paul, we let it off a little bit with Mike Tomlin. The comments are already on fire about him individually. How much blame does he deserve for this? And how much blame do these players deserve for just, I think, no showing pretty much across the board? I mean, I'm not trying to absolve Mike Tomlin of anything that you were saying before, but at a certain point, these guys just did not show up either.
No question. Again, here's the thing that's tough about blaming and talking about coaching, right? He gets a lot of credit when the Steelers win. And so, but when he loses, we do a whole lot of, well, was it his fault that, Russell Wilson fumbled the ball, right? Who was it that had a fumble? I don't even know. Freiermuth. Was it his fault that Freiermuth fumbled the ball? Was it his fault that, was it his fault? And it's like, well, then was it his fault when Russell Wilson throws a touchdown pass? I mean, on some level, coaching plays a role in every single game. And I thought in this game, I thought the Chiefs were playing chess and the Steelers were playing checkers. Honestly, it looked to me like Mike Tomlin and his staff were either not prepared for this game, which I know that's not the case because they're maniacal about how much they work, or they just really weren't on the same level as Andy Reid and his staff. And I think when you look at it from that lens, that's one part of the equation. Is it 100% why they lost? No, but I don't know that the Steelers coaching staff helped their team win today. I thought offensively, I'll give you another sequence that just made my head hurt. Jaylen Warren literally was running at will like crazy. And they had a sequence where they had maybe a 2nd and 7. Warren, I think they ran Warren the first play and maybe he got 4 yards. I think it was a 2nd and 6. And the next 2 plays, they hand it to Najee and then Cordarrelle Patterson, and they have to punt. I don't want to hear, that's on Arthur Smith, and he's the guy that's, talking about personnel. At the end of the day, every decision still has to go through Mike Tomlin. And to me, he's the one that has to say, you know what, forget about these other 2 guys right now. Jaylen Warren is feeling, he's running. They can't stop him. Let's just start feeding him the ball. And you know what? They don't ever do that. It's almost like he wants to make sure everybody gets their touches or something. It's weird.
It is incredible. I've been watching this backfield for what? Is this part of the 3rd season or the 2nd? I think it's part of 3 seasons now. I have no better understanding now than I did 3 years ago. What leads to the personnel that they use on a given play. When you see Najee running well, all of a sudden it seems like they're like, well, now you got to get Warren in there. And today I had that written down in the notes. I was going to get to it later, but he was running hard. I think the one cut thing was really working against this defense, and then they just went away from him. I'm looking at the final box score here. Let me hit refresh. But I think Najee out-carried Jaylen Warren in the end. 13 carries, 74 yards for Najee, 5.7. He had that couple long ones at the end to kind of pad things. Warren had 11 carries for 71 yards. That was 6.5 a carry, but they went away from him. Part of that was the negative game script, but part of it was inexplicable to me too, Paul, because they did keep running the ball a little bit. It just wasn't to the guy who had been kind of dominating this game.
Right. I think that's one of the most incredible stats I've ever seen. If I tell you last night, Adam, the Steelers are going to have 60 yards less in penalties than the Chiefs. And they're going to run for 202 yards, and the Chiefs are only going to run for 69. What is your thoughts on what you would think the game, the score would be?
Definitely more than 10 points, Paul.
You'd think that they'd have a lot more than 10 points. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the stats, and I will say this is one of the first games this year where Patrick Mahomes really looked like Patrick Mahomes. He was doing whatever he wanted to do to the Steelers. I mean, it was almost like it was unfair. I've watched a number of Chiefs games this year, and most of them he's been, able to make plays when they've needed him to make plays. But in this game, even when the Steelers cut it to 6 or whatever it was, I never felt like the Steelers were going to stop him. If he wanted to score, he could score. The couple of times they did stop him, they had a penalty, a hold against Watt, and they had there was another play where they got a really good positive play, but there was some kind of penalty. I mean, for the most part, they didn't stop Patrick Mahomes, but they ran the ball for 202 yards and lost the game. Not just lost the game, got blown out. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and Paul, I think we got to talk a little bit about Russell Wilson. This was, I believe, his worst game as a Steeler today. 23 of 37, 205 yards, averages 5.5 per attempt, takes the 5 sacks. The interception at the beginning of the game finishes with a passer rating of 65.7. You and I have talked about it on these post-game shows. I know you've talked about it, during your show during the week. That this is not all on Russell Wilson. This is not principally on Russell Wilson, but I think now you've lost these 3 big games to 3 of the best teams on your schedule. You've gotten worse, going from Philadelphia to now. They're not going in the right direction. This guy is not getting any younger. Is there any part of you that is questioning now whether you're going to write a check to Russell Wilson, whether he's making enough of a difference compared to where the Steelers were at quarterback a year ago and for the last 3 years since Ben Roethlisberger retired, that you can justify giving this guy a big contract? I still think they'll do it, and I don't blame him for, I think he's probably low in the totem pole of people that I'd blame. But if this team's not good enough and he's not like doing Patrick Mahomes stuff to lift them, can you write this guy a big check and not have at least some reservations about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the tough thing, and I know we're probably going to get into this conversation, the tough thing for me today with Russell Wilson is I felt like he was under duress the entire game. Like, I don't know that he had a lot of time to throw the ball a lot of time. I mean, this was the most I've seen him have to scramble and run, and, he did some things with his legs. I don't know that he was great, but he got sacked a few times. He got hit a few times. He got hurried a bunch. I don't know that the failures of the offensive line, I don't know that the failures of Russell Wilson today aren't intertwined with the fact that they just could not stop. And the worst part is, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the Chiefs' best, basically their best defensive lineman, their best, guy? Wasn't he out today? So I'm just saying, like, to me, I agree with you, but I don't know what else I've seen enough from him. I mean, let's say he goes and they beat the Bengals, and then let's even say Houston, the Baltimore wins this game today, and the Steelers have to go on the road and they beat Houston. If they win a playoff game in Houston, I think it's a hard case to not sign him. And so then it becomes how much you're going to sign him for. Clearly, for a few weeks there, it looked like he was going to be in the 2 years, $90 million range, but I don't know that that's the case now. I still think they're going to have to give him like 2 years, $60 million, and they're probably going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. They probably are not going to find a better option. Certainly in the near term, I don't think you're going to find someone who's a better quarterback for this team. It's just, I think it's more a question of, are you really any further down the tracks than you were a year ago when you're sliding into the back end of the playoffs and you're probably going to lose in the first round? You're saying, well, if they beat Houston, that would alleviate things. I didn't see a team today, Paul, that I think is going to beat Houston or any team in that AFC playoff field right now. I think they're the worst of those 7 teams that are pretty well locked in here.
Well, I think what changes the dynamic a little bit is, if they were to win the AFC North, we would be talking about them hosting a game against the Chargers or, the Chargers or the Broncos. I don't know. I like their chances against the rookie quarterback with the Broncos. The Chargers are almost 100% They're coached really well and play really well fundamentally, but I don't know how good they are. And, I'd like the Steelers' chances at home against them as well. But when you talk about the change now about maybe them having to go on the road in the playoffs, Adam, I agree with you. I don't know, 2 weeks ago I told you, yeah, they can go to Houston and win. There was no problem. Boy, I don't know. I just don't. I don't know what to think about this team right now. After that performance that we just saw, I don't know what to think about them because that was a horrific, it's one thing if they'd have lost to the Chiefs, and we were sitting here talking about how they lost to the Chiefs, but it was a tight, tough game, and they lost because Patrick Mahomes did his late game magic or whatever. But they were outclassed in this game. They were outcoached in this game. They were beaten in this game. They were beaten in just about every category you can be beaten at. And that makes you wonder, is this a team that can go on the road and win the playoffs? I just don't know that that's the case. But to your larger point about Russell Wilson, I just don't know that there's a better option for them out there next year. I don't know any guy that are there any quarterbacks that are going to be free agents that they would be able to go, or are there any guys that are disgruntled that they might be able to, trade for? I just don't think they're out there. And they're not going to draft high enough to get one of the best guys. They're not going to get Shedeur Sanders or somebody like that. So they're probably going to have to sign Russell Wilson. And if they do, boy, that's going to be a brutal, tough pill to swallow if he plays like this every week. But again, I really believe that a big part of his problem today was his offensive line was terrible.
Yeah, and I want to get into that, Paul. Man, it's not just this week. I do our PFF grades post usually every Tuesday on postgazette.com. I did it Monday this week because of the holiday, but Broderick Jones, Mason McCormick, Zach Frazier, they've all been trending poorly for these last several weeks at this point. Today was a disaster of epic proportions. I don't think you're seeing really any growth. All of the good stuff you've seen from these guys was much earlier in the season. Is it shaking your long-term confidence in this group at all? Because I think we sat here after the Eagles game and said, the Steelers want to be like that someday. They're building behind these young guys, and they're going to take their lumps a little bit. But that's, the belief is that that's where, the Steelers are going to end up at some point. I watched them today against a pass rush that did not have its best player just get destroyed, Paul. And I wonder if they are I wonder if this offensive line is going to put it together with all these young guys.
I mean, who was the worst probably on the offensive line, Adam, was the guy who's not the young guy, Dan Moore. I thought he was terrible today. And I'll tell you who else had a bad day, and he's supposed to be their best one, is Troy Ciamalo. I mean, Isaac Ciamalo. I mean, he was beaten and bull rushed and pushed around like he was a rookie, So you got to believe that Broderick Jones, he's got talent. Eventually, he's going to be a good player. I'm starting to think that, there might be a little bit of wishful thinking in that, but I'm still willing to say he's young enough that he could get, there. McCormick and Frazier are fine. I think they're developing, but I worry about this team a little bit, this offensive line, because I think, again, the last few weeks, what we've seen is when they've played a better defense or a better defensive front seven, they can't handle it. And you can point to the rushing numbers and say, well, clearly they're pretty good in the run game, but that's true. But Adam, we've sat here for 5 years talking about how they have to be able to throw the ball and throw it at a reasonably high level. And if they can't protect Russell Wilson, I don't care how many yards they run for. They're not winning in the playoffs. They need to be able to protect him, and they need to be able to throw the ball. But the problem is, okay, so you got Troy Fontenot, who, you drafted, and you hope that at some point he's going to be ready to play, next year or whatever. But the reality is they've got a lot of real questions in the two guys they drafted in the first round at offensive line. And they're probably not going to sign Dan Moore back. They're probably not going to give him a second contract or whatever. So I don't know, man. I think that if Jones and Fontenot don't pan out, that will be one of the biggest failures of this regime that currently is in place.
I think I completely agree with you, Paul, but I think it does go beyond that as well. In that some of these guys seem like they're regressing a little bit. Zach Frazier started, I thought, really well, and I think he's regressed a little bit. It's difficult to watch that and not question, the long-term trajectory here and what they've spent so much of this, Omar Khan, Andy Weidel project on, which is the trenches, and they're just not good enough. Before we talk about any of these other skill players, they're not good enough in either of those places on either side of the ball. You've got Cam Heyward, but on both lines, he's the only guy I think you can look at and say on a game-to-game basis you're getting consistency from, and that's not good enough from this front office. Paul, I did want to, before we get too far into this, to bring up George Pickens had the one big catch today, otherwise finished with 3 catches for 50 yards. So his other 2 catches were worth 9. The big one was worth 41. So he was pretty much a no-show after that first big catch, early in the game. And he was his body language was horrific for most of the game. He was angry. I've seen a lot of people using the phrase crash out. I mean, that he's close to that. And this is just what we see from him when they're losing pretty much every time. Is that he looks like a sore loser out there, Paul, and it's a bad look, and I think is he a good teammate? Can you be a good teammate when you're acting like that on the field as a professional?
Well, I think one of the things is that people will say, well, he's competitive, he wants to ball, he wants all this other stuff. I think one of the things about Pickens is in this game they had a hard time getting him the ball. And I think some of the frustration he had was he was open, but it seems like it goes back to what we were just talking about. There were a number of times when Russell Wilson just didn't have the time to throw it to him. And it's so when it comes to Pickens, his antics, Mike Tomlin said this about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it's so true. He's got to grow up, period. It's time to mature and stop being such a baby about things, right? If you don't get the ball, I get it. You're upset. I think the Steelers know your worth and your value. You're going to get paid by somebody, right? It's not about your stats or getting, going to drag you down when you go to try and get your next contract. And so there's no reason to be that way. You should want to win the game. And I get it. He believes the best way to win the game is to get him the ball. And I agree that probably is. If you can throw him the ball a bunch, you're going to win the game. But the bottom line is, you've got to be somebody who supports your teammates and supports your team. Or else, like you just said, you're not a good teammate. And if you're not a good teammate, I don't know that your value to the team is what it should be. And at that point, you probably make yourself somewhat expendable. Now, I don't believe that they should get rid of Pickens or trade him or anything like that. But there comes a point where you have to say to yourself, either this guy has to grow up or we have to move on from him.
Yeah, and I think, listen, we didn't even see this from Antonio Brown late in his career, where every single game that things aren't going his way, that he's throwing tantrums on the sideline. Certainly, there were those moments toward the end, but for most of his career here, you didn't see that stuff from Antonio Brown, who's like the gold example of the off-field distractions and all that type of stuff. And I think he's behaving worse than Antonio Brown did in certain ways, not off the field, but certainly on the field. And the way his body language and the way listen, the guy should be a leader on this unit just by how good he is. And I don't see that out there from him. Paul, I also wanted to talk about the calls today, because I know a lot of Steelers fans were upset with the officials. They've been upset with the officials for weeks. So I think you were making light of that on Twitter for most of that second half. There was the hold that nullified the touchdown early on, the Jaylen Warren touchdown that led directly to the Russell Wilson interception. There was the quick whistle on the Pickens catch toward the end of the first half that he had believed he had wriggled out of. I thought he did too. It seemed like a quick whistle. And then later on, what was the other one? And then the incomplete pass that they missed that led to that one, I think, pretty decisive Kansas City touchdown. What was your read on the officiating today and recently?
I think officiating is not great in the NFL, but I think I've said this many times, and I'll say it one more time for the cheap seats. I don't believe officiating is any worse today than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. I think the difference today from 20 years ago is that every single person in America has on their phone a gambling app, and they're all gambling on these games, and they're gambling to a level that we have never seen before. And as a result, you combine that with all of the replays we have and all of the ability we have in terms of having, digital screens and rewinds and all that other stuff. Officials have just never been as scrutinized as they are right now. That's the biggest thing. That's the difference. They're not any better or worse than they used to be. They're not any, there isn't any more of a conspiracy now. We're just paying attention more and more to all of the minutia of every little game because all of you out there are degenerates with these gambling apps on your phone, and that's all you do. And then you add fantasy football to that and everything else. It is all scrutinized at a level that it's never been scrutinized. And so I just think this whole thing with officials, we talk about it too much, and it's not just in the NFL, it's in every sport. Now, as far as today's game goes, it's a hard case to make that the officials were doing something, underhanded to help the Chiefs when they had 9 penalties for 90 yards and the Steelers had 3 for 30 yards. I mean, at the end of the day, the holding call was the right call. The roughing call was the right call. The pass that hit the ground, that's on the Steelers to throw the red flag to challenge that. I mean, at the end of the day, I've never seen a team be able to get up to the line as quickly as the Chiefs did and snap the ball without the other team saying, wait, we're throwing a red flag on that one. I mean, to me, I don't think the referees had anything to do with today's game. And I don't think in general they usually don't. Again, I think the one thing we do now that we didn't do before is everybody has gambling apps on their phone. And so they scrutinize every single thing about every single game that goes on. And it's like, dude, you got to relax a little bit. They're not going to get every single call perfectly. I think for the most part, officials get it right. They make mistakes, sure. But so do the players, so do the coaches.
Yeah, I mean, the incomplete call was the one that I think, bothered me the most because it was most obviously wrong and really not debatable if you watch the replay. But to your point, Paul, the players were all very confident that was an incomplete pass. So the red flag should have been out quickly.
Right.
And it wasn't. So I put that on Mike Tomlin in that, rarely do you see players be like that sure. Like sometimes they'll do it. They'll just do the perfunctory, like, incomplete when they're trying to buy the call, but they kind of do it half-heartedly. Those guys all knew that pass was incomplete. They should have said throw the flag, and he didn't. So that's on Mike Tomlin. You can't always wait for a replay, especially against a good team like the Chiefs that are going to get up to the line. Paul, we got a lot to talk about with this defense and where it stands with one game to go. It's bad. So if you're looking for some conversation about the defense, stick around. I just have to get a couple more ad reads in. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky & White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Also want to thank Archie's. The game's always on at Archie's on Carson, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. Be sure to check out their daily drink specials and stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you. Paul, is this defense, does it stink? Did they play some good offenses and just didn't play as well? I'm going to lean toward they stink. I don't know what part of this defense is playing well right now. And I can't cite one, point of failure. I think it's all 3 layers are not good enough at this moment.
Well, I mean, I guess we could start off by saying, well, they did hold the Chiefs to 69 yards rushing. But I'll be honest with you, it was kind of amazing. They started the game basically handing the ball off. And they had a lot of success running the football in the first drive, the first 2 drives. The Steelers tightened that down, but part of the reason they tightened it down and was able to stop it is because the Chiefs stopped trying to run. And they basically just said, we're looking at a Steelers secondary. And, of course, I hate to keep drawing on the same things we've been talking about for a year, But the Steelers secondary without Joey Porter Jr., right, is not – they basically have Joey Porter Jr., I will say he's a good NFL corner. Not ready to call him great, but he's a good NFL corner. Donte Jackson as your second guy is serviceable. And after that, they don't have a whole lot. So what we found out is if you can block their front seven, you can pick this team apart and throw guys. There were guys wide open all over the field. Didn't matter where and what Patrick Mahomes wanted to do, he did. And we talked about a lack of depth with this secondary, okay? Cam Sutton he looks terrible to me, okay? Minkah Fitzpatrick made a great play where he ran and made a tackle before the first down, and all of his fanboys on social media went crazy about, oh, you guys all – and then what? Guess what? The next 3 plays he was out of position and got beat for passes. But the bottom line to me is that secondary is the biggest problem, Adam, and it's the problem if they can't get to the quarterback, right? If teams figure out how to block up Watt and slow down Highsmith, basically. If that is the case and that happens, their secondary is not stopping anybody. That, to me, is the largest issue that you have. Now, the good news is if you play Houston, they've got Stroud, and, of course, half of their receivers are hurt. So, you might be able to get away with it a little bit. But if you play one of these teams with a really good quarterback, which there are a number of them, and actually forget about the playoffs, Adam. How about next or a week and a half from now when they have to play Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins? And here's the thing: if the Bengals somehow this week beat the Broncos, the Bengals will be, at least when the game kicks off, playing for a chance to get to the playoffs, right? When they play the Steelers, so they'll have everything riding on that game to play for. If they beat the Broncos. Right? You got to look at it this way. The one thing that will probably be against them and probably ultimately cost them is that the Broncos will be playing a Chiefs team that has nothing to play for, so they're not going to see, Mahomes or anybody like that. So that makes it difficult. But the reality is when the way how the NFL does the final week of the season, almost always, all of the games that are sort of tied together, they make sure they all kick off at the same time. So if the Bengals were to win this week, and let's say the Colts lose or the Dolphins lose, right? So now what they're going to do is they'll have the Bengals kick off at the same time as the Broncos and the same time as, say, the Dolphins if they win. And so when the game kicks off, and then, of course, and when the game kicks off, the Bengals will have everything in the world to play for. And so, you got to be worried about this secondary in many, many ways. From the standpoint of, I just think that they didn't do enough to bolster it, to get it better. And I know that they traded for Donte Jackson. I thought they needed at least 1, if not 2 more legitimate players.
It's the depth. The only layer that I think that they have depth at this moment, Paul, is at middle linebacker, and those guys have not been playing well, but I think that they go pretty deep. Well, I just say the linebackers in general. They have depth at that position. But up front, they don't have it, and especially in the secondary, they don't have it to the point that, you couldn't weather it when Donte Jackson was the one that was hurt, and now you can't weather it when Joey Porter's the one that's hurt. And we talked about it all offseason, and then it kind of went away when the pass rush was getting home against some of these, bad quarterbacks, not great quarterbacks that they were facing early in the season. But now that they're seeing these guys who can get the ball out fast, know where it needs to go, they're just not covering, period.
Yeah, period. I mean, you're absolutely right. And what's worse is there's a lot of confusion. It seems like, pre-snap confusion from the defense. They're trying to figure out where they're all supposed to be. They're arguing with each other as the ball is being snapped, and they're yelling at each other about who's supposed to be where. And, the Chiefs complete like a 15-yard pass for a first down. Those are things that cannot happen. And I just feel like it's one of those situations where it is now or never for this team. They've got to figure out how to stop quarterbacks that can actually throw the ball. They've got to figure out how to stop these passing games. They've got to figure out how to get stops when they're not getting home when they're not getting home to the quarterback with their front seven. They've got to figure out how to stop it, or else it's going to be a actually a very short, a very, very short postseason.
Yeah, certainly think it's trending in that direction, Paul. Let's talk a little Patrick Queen. He was vociferous after that Ravens loss. Drops the pick today. I think he's part of this conversation there in the middle of the field of just not good enough right now. What's your read on that move and all of the hope that accompanied this guy coming in, that he was going to be the Ryan Shazier that this defense has missed, the type of guy who can go sideline to sideline and has the ability to do it all. He's had some moments this season, but when it's really mattered, I'm not seeing that guy.
Well, Queen was brought in, you're right, to be the guy, to be the missing piece. And I don't know that he's been that. I think he's been okay, though, Adam. I don't think he's been terrible. I think he's been okay. I mean, would you say he's been okay?
I'd say he's been okay to good for a good chunk of the season, but he's been not good enough in this, these key losses late in the season.
But I think you're right. The sideline to sideline thing I have not seen from him at all. He has not been tremendous in coverage, I don't think. The thing about him and Landon Roberts is they've been very similar. They're both pretty good at bringing them, laying the wood on guys and coming up and knocking people out and making big, high impact tackles. But they haven't been good at being complete linebackers. And I think that's part of the problem. Those two guys, Peyton Wilson's a rookie. The reality is their inside linebacker play has tremendously improved over the last couple of years, but I still don't know that it's quite where it needs to be. Queen was supposed to be that guy, but as you pointed out, I just don't know that he is. I think that when you make that kind of a play for a guy like him, you're expecting him to really transform your team into something that it isn't. And, he just hasn't been able to do that yet. I don't think he's been terrible, but I think that he's been good. I think that he's been a guy who has just sort of been good enough, but he's been exposed a little bit in coverage. And I think that, he's also been exposed when it comes to making big plays when the Steelers need a big play. When you have stars on defense, right? And, the score's 22-10 and you absolutely need a stop. You need TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Cam Heyward, Patrick Queen, or Minkah. One of those guys needs to make a big high impact play to change the game. That's why they're getting paid the way they're getting paid. And Queen hasn't made enough of those plays for me this year.
Paul, we'll get you out of here on this. Obviously, a part of today was the first ever game on Netflix, NFL game on Netflix. My stream was fine. I wasn't sure how things would go after that. What was it, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight, where everyone had a lot of problems connecting. You can let us know in the comments how things went for you, but it seemed like it went pretty seamlessly from a broadcast perspective. I thought Nate Burleson thought he was still doing Slime Time Live or whatever it is. It was like he was doing the football for dummies thing when that was not kind of the crowd that this was targeted at. Other than that, Iron Eagle's pro. I thought JJ Watt was decent for his first game in the booth like this, but Burleson was saying a lot of obvious stuff that was a little irritating.
My ears are bleeding from listening to that guy. He was horrible. I hope I never have to watch a game with Nate Burleson. First of all, I think if you watch any of his shows, his takes are terrible anyway. I think he's just sort of a guy. I have no idea who looked at him and said, this guy's got talent. Let's put him on TV so he can talk. I think he's bad anyway, Adam. But the other, he did in my mind, okay, Brady at times is bad, but some points Brady actually breaks down football for you. You know what I mean? In a way that guys like you and I and guys that aren't in huddles and aren't in meeting rooms and all that stuff watching film, we might not be able to break it down. I think there's at least a redeeming quality to Brady. Burleson has zero redeeming qualities because I don't know that he really, really fully understands football. And he commits the worst sin you can commit in that seat. And that is he really believes that he's getting paid by the word. So he has to just keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And a lot of times it just becomes vapid, nonsensical, idiotic stuff that, detracts from the game. So I agree with you. I think he was terrible. I watched the game on Channel 2, so I mean, is that the same feed as the Netflix? I don't know. But either way, I didn't have any problems watching it. I thought it was fine. J.J. Watt just sort of was, kind of like a musclehead in the booth who really didn't add a whole lot. But you know what? He didn't really try to either, so that was good. But yes, Iron Eagle obviously is a pro, and he basically was the only redeeming quality they had in their booth. So hopefully, Adam, this was one and done for us to have to watch a game with Nate Burleson commenting.
Yeah, it was the production quality was, I thought, nice. I thought it was a nice crisp picture, what you would hope for from these streaming giants, in that, because I noticed it during the Thursday night game in the snow. I'd had the local feed on, and then I switched to the 4K Amazon feed, and it was like night and day. It looked beautiful, the snow on that game. I thought it was a similar situation today with Netflix, so enjoyed that part of it. The booth, everything else, it seemed like there were a lot of CBS people working on that broadcast, and didn't really feel a whole lot different than the average CBS broadcast. But interesting to see how that unfolded. Paul, any final thoughts before we sign off here and get about our Christmas Day celebrations?
Well, as I said before, if the Steelers now they're reduced to rooting for Houston, otherwise they'll be headed to Houston. If Houston doesn't win today, the Steelers will be headed to Houston the first week of the playoffs, and of course that's never a good thing.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to watch that game. Merry Christmas, everybody. We had a great crowd for a holiday. I think we were all pretty shocked that so many of you stopped by. So we really appreciate you making us your post-game destination here. Paul, do you have one more thing?
Yeah, I was going to say, don't forget, the Thursday and Friday I'll be doing my live show at 5 o'clock, breaking down this and many, many more things when it comes to the Steelers. We've got a lot to talk about, and we will definitely do that at 5 o'clock like we try and do every night, right around 5.
Absolutely. Subscribe for that. Subscribe for Jerry Dulac, Ray Fittipaldo. They'll do their post-game video. We'll get that up at some point this evening. Christopher Carter's going to be back, I believe, with a special Thursday edition of the North Shore Drive and Friday, Paul.
7-0 Ravens, by the way. Derrick Henry just ran it in. Go ahead.
No, that's all I got. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Please like it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We appreciate that. And otherwise, enjoy your holiday, everyone. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.